I'm pregnant, and the cub is my mortal enemy. That's not the point. The point is, I'm a man. When I heard the doctor's diagnosis, I felt like I was struck by lightning. The doctor smiled and told me to go home and discuss it with the child's father. I shook the doctor's shoulder. Is it you who is upside down, or is it the world that is upside down? Has the world evolved to the point where men can get pregnant? The doctor calmly pushed my hand away, adjusted his glasses, and began his professional analysis in a tone as flat as that of an AI. When your mother was pregnant, she was supposed to have twins, a boy and a girl. Later, due to various reasons, the other fetus did not survive, but parasitized on you. So you actually have a uterus inside your body, but it's much smaller than a normal woman's, and it's in a very hidden location, which is why it hasn't been discovered for so many years. It should be due to the recent changes in hormone levels in the body that this uterus has gradually appeared. I stared blankly at the doctor's mouth opening and closing as if he was chanting a spell, and finally he couldn't hold on any longer and passed out. When I woke up, it was already evening and the doctor was sitting next to me, looking calm. I struggled to get up and leave. The doctor quickly held my hand and spoke earnestly. It's risky for a man to get pregnant, and you're weaker than most people. You must discuss this with your partner when you get back. If you don't want it, you have to make plans early. I was stunned for a moment before I remembered to thank the doctor and slowly walked out of the hospital. As soon as I walked to the hospital entrance, I felt a little weak, so I sent a text message to my assistant and asked her to pick me up. I found a place where no one was around and sat down. As soon as I sat down, the phone rang. It's Brandon. Well, I haven't even gone to settle accounts with him yet, but he comes to me first. I was so angry that I started talking as soon as I answered the phone. Brandon, I am so unlucky to have met you. There seemed to be a pause on the other end of the phone, and then Brandon's distinctive voice sounded. How have I offended you? You're cursing too badly. I haven't even said a single curse word yet. I was still furious. Brandon seemed to sigh. I called to ask you if you will go to the bidding meeting of Civic Company the day after tomorrow? What do you care whether I go or not? I just couldn't muster up a good temper towards the culprit who made me pregnant, so I just hung up the phone after saying that. As we all know, Brandon and I are sworn enemies. When I was a sophomore in high school, Brandon transferred to my school and immediately took the top spot in my grade. At that time, my parents had just passed away in a car accident, and I devoted myself to my studies, expecting to escape reality amidst the intense academic workload. Brandon became my strong rival as soon as he arrived, forcing me to focus all my attention on him. From then on, the two of us were forced to be entangled with each other throughout our high school career. I got first place in the first monthly exam, so he will definitely surpass me in the second monthly exam. I won first place in the physics competition, and he must have won first place in the English competition. It wasn't until the college entrance examination that I thought I could finally get rid of him. Unexpectedly, he got the same score as me. What was even more unexpected was that we ended up going to the same university by chance. I also chose the same major. Even high school teachers have to sigh, what a bad fate. As a result, the whole Peking University knew that there were two boys in the computer science major who worked hard every day. At that time, our college had a forum, and we took turns to be the school idol. After graduation, my classmate Justin and I founded Xinghe Network Technology Company, Limited. For 2 years, the two of us worked day and night, and our employees were astonished at how hard we worked. Fortunately, hard work pays off. The company had reached a scale of 100 people by the end of last year and occupied 2 floors of space in an office building. Unexpectedly, half a year ago, a rival suddenly appeared. The business and scale are very similar to our company, and even the customers overlap. Justin and I decided to visit first to find out what was going on. I still remember it was a cloudy day. The two of us were sitting in the Tianyue Company conference room waiting, when suddenly the door opened. When I turned around, I saw Brandon standing at the door in a suit. Suddenly my eyes went dark and I almost fainted. From then on, I would always run into this person at major business receptions, bidding sites, and even private client gatherings. In just half a year, Tianyue and Xinghe have become rivals in the business world. At the same time, Brandon and I were at loggerheads. 3 months ago, Civic announced that it would launch a bidding for a project. This opportunity is very important to Xinghe, but dispensable to Tianyue. Justin advised me to have a good talk with Brandon and try not to let him go to the bidding meeting. So, 2 months ago, I made an appointment to meet Brandon at a bar. He planned to get him drunk first and then take the opportunity to brainwash him. Unexpectedly, the person was indeed drunk, and he was not the only one drunk. The key is that he fell drunk on the bed. Thinking of this, I really have a headache. The assistant had just arrived, so I opened the back door and got in. The assistant asked me whether I wanted to go to the company or go home. I pinched my brows and said, "Let's go home." The assistant is a girl in her 20s, who is thoughtful and drives very steadily. I felt drowsy along the way. As soon as I got home, Justin called me and said he had something to discuss with me and asked me to wait at home. I sighed and said, "Come here, I need your help with something." Justin is the only close friend I have had in these years. The pregnancy was a real blow to me. Even though I've been used to being independent since I was a child, I still feel a little unsure now and want to talk to someone. About half an hour after I hung up the phone, Justin arrived. As soon as he came in, he was in a hurry and kept complaining that I hadn't been to the company for the past few days and he was very busy. I turned around and poured him a glass of water. Justin saw that I was distracted and seemed a little confused. "What's wrong? Are you still feeling unwell?" He knew that I had been feeling like vomiting these days and thought I had a stomach problem. I shook my head. "I'm pregnant." Puff. Justin spat out a mouthful of water and started coughing violently. I had anticipated his reaction and calmly handed him the tissue. Justin coughed for a long time, then stood up and immediately came over to touch my forehead. "Are you confused by the burning sensation?" I frowned and slapped his hand away, then took out today's medical examination report and handed it to him. Justin took it suspiciously, looking at me as he flipped through it. Gradually, he had no time to look at me, and his mouth slowly opened into an O shape. I sighed secretly. It seems that no normal person can accept it. Justin read the papers over and over again. "So, you really?" I nodded. "Really? Whose?" He immediately raised his voice. I felt a little embarrassed and wanted to avoid answering. Justin stared at me with sharp eyes, determined to get a result out of me. I coughed uncomfortably. Didn't I make an appointment with Brandon to go to the bar more than 2 months ago? Oh my God. I knew this guy was up to no good. I saw it when we were in college. Did he force you? I'm going to find him. As he said this, he was about to rush out. I quickly stood up, stopped him, and pressed him down on the sofa. We were both drunk and I don't know what happened. Later we agreed to just pretend nothing happened. Justin stood up again after hearing this. "What a stupid fool you are. He was so happy that he got you pregnant, but you're still acting like nothing happened. He's the modern chin shimmy." Justin was very angry and I really didn't dare to provoke him. I just sat quietly beside him and listened to him cursing like a modern-day chin shimmy for half an hour. Later, when he got tired of scolding me, I carefully asked him what he originally wanted to discuss with me. Justin said, "What else could it be? The civic bidding will be held the day after tomorrow. I asked someone about it and it should be between us and Sky Leap." Then he glanced at my belly again and asked, "What are your plans for this?" I shook my head. "I haven't thought about it yet." Justin got angry again. "Aren't you going to tell him? I just read the report, and it says the risks are huge. Whether to abort or give birth to the baby, you have to discuss it with that scumbag." I pressed my forehead, my head hurting even more because of Justin's noise. "I'll find a chance to tell him." Justin saw that I was really upset, so he snorted and left. On the day of the civic bidding, I was afraid that Justin would have a conflict with Brandon on the spot. It took a lot of persuasion to get him to agree to leave. I went there with my assistant and took the new plan from the project department. When I arrived at the scene, I saw Brandon dressed like a colorful peacock, socializing with people everywhere. I was speechless. 90% of this man's success today is due to his mouth. I looked around and didn't see the owner of the Civic, so I took the initiative to find a corner to sit down. Not long after I sat down, I saw a pot-bellied man walking towards me. "Patrick, long time no see, please do me a favor and have a drink." I immediately felt disgusted, but I didn't show it on my face. I picked up a glass of juice and stood up. "Jeffrey, long time no see. I've been sick recently and can't drink. I'll toast you with juice instead of wine." This guy is really tactless. "I heard that Patrick can drink quite well, what's wrong? Don't you want to give face to Mr. Wu?" I smiled and shook my head. "I'm so sorry. Jeffrey, if you want a drink, come find me. I can't usually invite you." I turned around and it was Brandon. "It's Brandon. Jeffrey, there's a project I want to discuss the details with you about. Why don't you come over and talk?" Brandon said as he held Jeffrey's shoulders and led him to the other side. Brandon invited me, so of course I have to go. After the two people left, I sat down again and took a deep breath, trying to suppress my churning stomach. After a while, the owner of Civic arrived and everyone quickly took their seats, waiting for the announcement of the bidding results. As Justin said, Civic announced that the project would be handed over to one of the two companies, Xinghe and Tianyue. But who will it be specifically? We each need to make a more detailed plan to compete. I was not surprised to hear this result. I've heard that the owner of Civic has an eccentric style, so this decision was expected. After talking with the boss of Civic, I prepared to go back to the company to have a meeting with the people in the project department. Before I even went out, I ran into Brandon again. "Patrick, it's still early, why are you in such a hurry to go back? Why don't we have a meal together?" How can Brandon be so lucky? Brandon makes a living by eating, unlike us who can only rely on hard work. "You." Brandon glared at me, then turned around and smiled again. "Everyone says Patrick is gentle, why is he so mean to me?" As he spoke, he took a step forward and leaned closer to my ear. "Patrick has such a cruel heart. Since becoming pregnant, I have become particularly sensitive to smells. As soon as Brandon got close to me, I smelled a pungent scent of perfume on him, and I couldn't help but retch. I immediately covered my mouth and went to the bathroom. Brandon was left standing there like a petrified man. After entering the bathroom, I lay over the sink and vomited for a long time, but nothing came out. Tears were forced out and the corners of her eyes were red. I lowered my head to wash my face, and just as I was about to take a tissue to wipe it, a handkerchief was handed to me. I looked up and it was Brandon. I paused and didn't take his handkerchief. "Stay away from me." My breathing was still a little unstable. "Patrick, don't go too far. I'm not being kind to you and want you to humiliate me." Brandon got angry and continued to yell. I was a little annoyed and looked up at him. He suddenly fell silent and started stuttering. Are you doing your stomach feel uncomfortable? Do you want to? Your perfume is too strong. It makes me uncomfortable," I said in a hoarse voice. "Oh." Brandon coughed twice, touched his nose and took a few steps back to the door. When I packed up and prepared to go out, I saw Brandon still standing at the door. I paused, remembering Justin's words. "Brandon." I pursed my lips and looked up at him. "What's wrong?" He seemed a little surprised that I would call him. "This Saturday afternoon at 2 o'clock, in the private room of Wangyue Building, I have something to discuss with you." What's going on? So formal? Wangyue Tower is a famous restaurant in Beijing. Because of its high price and good privacy, it is loved by many celebrities and people who don't like crowds. I ignored what Brandon said next and just left. On Saturday morning, I sent Brandon a text message. 12 o'clock, Wangyue Building 208. Brandon quickly replied, "Received." I took a deep breath and was about to confront Brandon, feeling a little unsure. I went back to the bedroom, sorted out the examination reports and medical records from a week ago, put them in my bag, and planned to show them to Brandon directly later. Seeing that the time was almost up, he called a taxi on his phone. I haven't driven since I found out I was pregnant. At 11:40, I arrived at the entrance of Wangyue Building, told the front desk the name of the person I had made an appointment with, and prepared to go in first. When I was almost at the door of room 207, I heard a very noisy sound coming from inside. I was a little surprised. It's rarely so noisy here. Just as I was about to walk over, I heard someone inside mention my name. How can Patrick compare to Brandon? Whether in appearance or personality, he is far inferior to our brother Win. That's right, what's the point of being handsome? He has a stern face every day, as if others owe him 8 million. There was a laugh from the back that vaguely sounded like Brandon's. I was stunned for a moment and stopped. By the way, didn't you read that forum when you were in college? At that time, many people were talking about the couple of Wengu and Patrick. A girl brought it up excitedly. What is CP? Brandon asked. You are a couple. Many people imagine that you two are a couple. Another burst of laughter broke out in the room. Patrick and me? No, what do you guys think? How can we be a couple? Brandon cursed with a smile. You two handsome guys are a perfect match. It's so pleasing to the eyes standing together. Brandon sneered. Don't mention that he's a man and can't have children. Even if he had my child and knelt in front of me, I would never accept it. There was another noise at the back, but I couldn't hear it clearly. My stomach suddenly felt like it was being tightened, and an indescribable pain instantly spread throughout my body. I subconsciously squatted on the ground, holding my stomach, frowning, and beads of sweat oozing from my forehead. This sudden situation made me feel extremely scared and helpless. The world around me seemed to have stopped at this moment, and only the violent heartbeat echoed in my ears. 7. A waiter saw it, called out, and hurried over to help me. I tried to regulate my breathing and calm myself down. Suddenly, the door opened. Brandon came out and seemed stunned when he saw me. He reacted quickly and immediately ran over to help me. Patrick, what's wrong with you? Brandon's voice was a little flustered. My hands were shaking from the pain, and I tugged at the hem of Brandon's short-sleeved shirt. Help me get to the box first. Brandon ignored the people coming out behind him and just picked me up and went to room 208. Brandon carefully put me on the soft chair in the box and asked me anxiously, do you have a stomachache? Do you want to call 120? My hair was already soaked with cold sweat, and I shook my head weakly. Please call Justin for me. Brandon was stunned for a moment, then quickly took out his cell phone, dialed Justin's number and put it next to my ear. The call was connected, and Justin's full-throated voice came from the other end of the phone. Brandon? I ignored the new nickname Justin gave Brandon and spoke to Justin with all my strength. I'm Patrick, 208 Wangyue Building. I have a severe stomachache. Please come quickly. Just as he finished speaking, Justin's scream came from the other side. I frowned and Brandon quickly moved his phone away. Can I take you to the hospital? Brandon asked, squatting next to me. I shook my head. He looked at me for a while and went out. When he came back, he had a cup of hot water and a hot towel in his hand. He handed the water to my mouth and fed me a few sips, then came to help me wipe the sweat off my forehead. I really didn't have the energy to resist, so I just let him do it. After taking a few sips of hot water, I tried taking a few deep breaths and felt that my stomach didn't hurt as much as before. I was just about to tell Brandon that he didn't need to wipe my sweat off. Suddenly the door opened and Justin strode in. He saw Brandon touching my face. You dare to bully Patrick? I will destroy you today. Before I could say anything to stop him, Justin punched Brandon in the face. While beating him, he also cursed, You have no conscience. Do you know Patrick? Justin. I quickly stopped him from saying the next thing. Stop hitting me, take me to the hospital. Justin looked back at me, stood up angrily, raised his index finger and pointed at Brandon viciously, then came over to help me. Justin had just helped me into his car when Brandon ran out again. Let's go to Boya Hospital. I've already made arrangements with them. Brandon looked at me and said. Justin snorted coldly. The weasel is paying New Year's greetings to the chicken. He has no good intentions. I really didn't want to deal with him anymore, so I shook my head. Thank you, but that's okay. At my request, Justin sent me to the 3rd hospital. He found a wheelchair and pushed me up and down to check. After completing the hospitalization procedures, the old doctor who had informed me of my pregnancy came over and handed me the test results. It's nothing serious. It's probably a stress reaction caused by emotional stimulation. Stay in the hospital for 2 days for observation. If everything is fine, you can be discharged. I nodded. Thank you, doctor. The old doctor sighed and glanced at Justin, who was sitting next to him with a gloomy face. Many people experience various emotions during pregnancy due to changes in hormone levels, so family members still need to comfort them. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. You misunderstood, he is my friend. The doctor was a little surprised, coughed twice awkwardly, and went out. I saw that Justin still looked unhappy, and I felt a little guilty. Haven't we already fought? Why are you still unhappy? Justin looked disappointed and said, You haven't told him about your pregnancy yet? I paused and shook my head slightly. Justin sighed, What about this kid? I want to keep the child. The doctor said that whether I keep the child or not, I will have to bear the same risk. Then I smiled bitterly. You know, I have few relatives. This child is the only one in the world who is related to me by blood. I really don't want to break this fate. Justin saw that I was a little sad and immediately patted my shoulder casually. When the child is born, I will be the godfather. You can tell Brandon if you want to. If you don't want to, forget it. The child doesn't need a father anyway. I smiled and said, Okay. In the evening, I asked Justin to go home first, and I read a book in the ward. Suddenly I received a text message. Are you feeling better? Which hospital are you in? It's Brandon. I turned off my phone and didn't reply. It seems Brandon can't accept the fact that I'm pregnant. Since you want to keep the child, it would be better for us to reduce contact to avoid embarrassment in the future. Unfortunately, Murphy's Law is everywhere. The more you don't want to see it, the more you see it. A week later, I had to attend a drinking party at the invitation of my partner. Because I couldn't drink alcohol due to pregnancy, I had to bring a department manager from the company with me. The other party was a typical business person who liked to talk business over wine. After the meal, the company manager was drunk and unconscious. He was quite tall, and it was difficult for me to support him, so I had to carry him out. As soon as I walked out of the hotel, I ran into Brandon. He seemed to have just finished his meal, and there was a faint smell of alcohol on him. There was a girl standing next to him. I didn't want to have any more involvement with him, so I nodded and prepared to go. Unexpectedly, Brandon took a quick step and blocked my way. Hey, has Patrick's misophobia been cured? This guy smelled so strongly of alcohol that he didn't even vomit. It would have been fine if he didn't say anything, but as soon as he did, I felt my stomach churning. I raised my head and glared at him. Whether I have misophobia or not doesn't seem to have anything to do with Brandon. Brandon was stunned for a moment, then immediately frowned, stared at me for a long time, and suddenly sneered. Patrick, why don't you change your habit of picking up people when you're drunk? Are you going to the hotel? Do you want me to give you a ride? You bastard! I was immediately furious and clenched my fists, wishing I could punch him in the face. Hey, Brandon, stop talking nonsense. The girl next to him came over and pulled Brandon's arm. Brandon immediately took her hand. The girl seemed a little surprised. Then she started laughing. This is my girlfriend. Brandon glanced at the girl and said, Say hello to Patrick. The girl glanced at Brandon and then smiled and greeted me. Hi Patrick, I'm Nora. I was stunned for a moment, nodded, and didn't want to say more to them. Brandon insisted, Patrick, you didn't expect that. You always compete with me in everything, but when it comes to getting a girlfriend, you lose to me. Suddenly, a feeling of fatigue welled up in my heart. He forced a smile and said, Congratulations. After saying that, I ignored Brandon's gloomy face and left quickly. I felt a little uneasy the whole next day. Justin saw through it and volunteered to act as my psychiatrist. Tell me about it. I looked up at him, pinched the bridge of my nose, and sighed again. I ran into Brandon last night. He dares to bother you? Justin's voice immediately rose. I glanced at him and said, Just listen to me first. Justin took 2 deep breaths and motioned for me to continue. He was having dinner with his girlfriend. Last night I realized I had overlooked one thing. Brandon will have a family. He will marry and have children like most people. If I give birth to this child, wouldn't that make him an illegitimate child? Wouldn't it be like I'm a little bitch who destroys other people's families? I couldn't utter the last word. Justin sighed. Patrick, this is not your fault in the first place. Why do you have to bear it all by yourself? My suggestion is that whether you want this child or not, you should. Let's discuss this with another dad. I was really confused. Let's wait until I get the checkup done tomorrow before we talk about it. Early the next morning, I went to see the doctor. First, complete an inspection according to his requirements. The doctor's expression was a little serious. Have you been too busy recently and haven't had enough rest? Several of your physical indicators are not up to standard, and the fetus is also a little small. I rubbed my brows and said hesitantly, if I want to take it off, the sooner the better, right? The doctor was a little surprised. According to the examination, although the fetus is small, it is healthy. Have you made a decision? I lowered my head and touched my stomach, but didn't reply immediately. And you will feel the fetus moving soon, and it will be past the best time to abort it. It will require an open abdominal surgery, which carries great risks. I suggest you think about it carefully. I took a deep breath and stood up, nodding, I'll think about it. After saying that, he pushed the door and went out. I walked out with the checklist in my hand, feeling mixed emotions. I felt like I had walked into a house with no windows and didn't know how to get out. I accidentally bumped into a pedestrian and the bills in my hand fell to the ground. I'm sorry. I immediately bowed and apologized, then lowered my head to pick up the list on the ground. A hand nearby picked up a medical record. Early pregnancy? It was Brandon's voice. I was shocked and immediately stood up and snatched the medical record from his hand. Brandon was stunned for a moment, then sneered, Patrick is really capable. Yesterday he was messing around with a man, and today he got another woman pregnant. Is he into both men and women? Before he could finish, I raised my hand and slapped him. Immediately, many people looked over at me. Brandon's head tilted from the blow. He wiped the corner of his lips with his thumb and turned to look at me. Are you looking for death? He fell silent before he could finish his words. I shed big tears. 11. I haven't cried in front of others for many years since my parents died in a car accident when I was in high school. But why does Brandon keep picking on me and bullying me? Why did such an outrageous thing as a man getting pregnant happen to me? I suddenly felt very tired and wronged, and my tears flowed like a flood that I couldn't hold back. Brandon froze and immediately panicked. Don't cry, I was just kidding. I didn't mean that. He reached out his hand and tried to wipe my tears, but I turned my head away. Without waiting for him to continue explaining, I turned around and left, hailing a taxi on the side of the road and got in. As soon as I got in the car, Brandon called. I didn't answer and just blocked the call. I called Justin and told him that I wanted to go abroad to rest for a while and asked him to take over the company. Justin agreed without hesitation and forwarded me a travel guide. I gladly accepted the suggestion and left the country that afternoon. On the third day of the holiday, Justin called me and said that Brandon had invited him to dinner to discuss the bidding for Civic Company and asked me if he would like to accept the invitation. I smiled and said, just make your own decision. There's no need to let personal matters interfere with work. On the fourth day of the holiday, Justin sent me a text message saying that he had done something very sorry to me and hoped that I would not hold it against him after returning. He then went on to accuse Brandon of having ulterior motives, being scheming, being cunning, and dozens of other crimes. I was a little confused about what his being sorry for me had to do with Brandon, but I soon found out. A week later, I returned home with my suitcase. As soon as I got out of the elevator, I saw a man standing at my door. It's Brandon. He seemed to have bruises on the corners of his mouth and was holding a cigarette, but it was not lit. When Brandon saw me coming back, he immediately threw away his cigarette and greeted me hesitantly, Jiang? Patrick. Why are you here? I walked over and opened the door. I want to talk to you. I paused as if I knew what Justin meant by, I'm sorry. I sighed and opened the door, come in. Brandon sat on the couch, looking a little reserved. I poured him a glass of water and sat on the other side. You. He seemed a little embarrassed and didn't know how to start. I glanced at him and continued, I'm pregnant, yours? Brandon almost choked and his face turned red. After hesitating for a long time, he finally whispered, "I'm sorry." I smiled bitterly and shook my head. "It's not just your fault." I asked Justin, "And he said you wanted to have an abortion?" Brandon asked cautiously. I lowered my head and lost in thought, not responding. Brandon was a little anxious. "I have consulted many doctors. Now is past the best time for abortion. If I insist on having the baby removed, it will be very dangerous for the baby's life." I turned to look at him. "Giving birth is also risky." Brandon stood up from the couch, walked over to me and sat cross-legged on the floor. I asked someone to consult top experts at home and abroad. There are precedents for your situation. Many doctors are confident that they can perform surgery on you. I paused for a moment and said, "What about you?" "Me what?" "What should I do, Nora?" "Nora." He seemed to have forgotten who Nora was. I kindly reminded, "Your girlfriend." Brandon coughed twice and touched his nose. She's not my girlfriend. She's my blind date. We've only met once. That day I was just making it up." Brandon lowered his head and didn't dare look at me. I was a little speechless. "Even if she is not your girlfriend, you still have to marry and have children in the future, and when this child is born." "I won't get married and have children." Brandon interrupted me before I could finish. I was a little surprised and looked at him in confusion. "I'm gay." Brandon looked at my shocked expression and immediately assured me. "It's true. I won't get married. I will only have this child in your belly in this life." After the words were spoken, we both felt a little embarrassed. I rubbed my brows and said, "So, you support me giving birth to the child?" Brandon nodded immediately. "Yes, I will take good care of you during this period, and when the child is born, I will seriously fulfill my duties as a father." I shook my head. "Forget about taking care of me. I can do it myself." "No," I asked Dr. Liu. "He said you are not in good health and the fetus is not developing well. For the health of the baby, I have to move in to take care of you." "You're moving here?" I was surprised. Brandon nodded, looking determined. "Yeah, it's all for the kids." I think. Brandon acted quickly and moved everything in the next day. He didn't have much luggage, but he did buy a lot of things online. When I came out of the bedroom, I saw him sorting out the things he bought. When I walked over and took a look, I was shocked. It has everything from toiletries to kitchen utensils, and even 2 massagers. "Are you going to open a supermarket? Why are you buying so many things?" "I bought these according to the online list of must-buys for pregnant women. They are harmless to adults and children. Go and take a rest. I'll cook for you after I finish cleaning up." I was a little worried, so I went to the refrigerator, got a bottle of yogurt, walked into the living room, turned on the TV, and watched and observed Brandon. I didn't expect that he looked like a young master, but he was quite skillful in doing housework. After a while, he packed up his things and cleaned the guest bedroom for himself. As I watched, I started to feel sleepy and fell asleep on the sofa. When I woke up, it was almost dark and the lights in the living room were not on. I was covered with a small blanket that Brandon must have taken from my bedroom. I slowly sat up from the sofa and turned my head to look in the direction of the light. Brandon was busy in the kitchen wearing an apron, and the aroma of food was coming out. I have lived alone in this house for a long time, and now that there is one more person, it actually feels not bad. Not long after, Brandon came out of the kitchen, saw that I was awake, and turned on the light. "Are you awake? Go wash your hands. I've prepared dinner. I didn't expect you could cook." "Hey, you really think I've never done anything dirty?" I curled my lips, expressing my concern about his cooking skills. When I came out of the bathroom, Brandon had already brought the food to the table. I walked over and saw steamed fish, steamed pork ribs with winter melon, shrimp balls stuffed with mushrooms, and loofah and tofu soup, all of which were my favorite light flavors. Brandon saw that I was a little surprised and raised his lips. "Try it." I tried a bite of each dish. "How about it?" I nodded and praised sincerely. "It's almost comparable to Wang Yue Tower." Brandon laughed out loud. "You know what you are talking about." Since I became pregnant, I have had little appetite and have been eating a lot without realizing it. By the time I came to my senses, I was already feeling a little uncomfortable, so I stood up to digest the food. Brandon saw that I didn't want to eat anymore, so he quickly finished the rest. I wandered around the living room for a while, suddenly felt a little nauseous, and ran to the bathroom. Brandon followed me and was locked in front of the bathroom door by me. After I finished vomiting, Brandon immediately handed me a glass of warm water. I took a sip and felt a little depressed. Brandon saw that I was depressed and immediately comforted me. "It's okay. The doctor said to eat small meals frequently. We'll know next time. I've also made fish soup in the kitchen. When you're hungry, we can eat it, okay?" I nodded and walked over to lie down on the couch. Brandon came over, sat down at my feet and gave me a massage with the massager. I wanted to refuse at first, but I don't know which acupoint he pressed, but it felt quite comfortable. I fell asleep without realizing it. The next day, I had breakfast at home and was sent downstairs to the company by Brandon. Before getting off the bus, Brandon handed me a lunchbox. I took it and asked, "What is this?" "Your lunch." Brandon looked at me and said, "Just heat it up in the microwave at noon and eat the fruit in the afternoon." I didn't answer and shook my head. "Don't bother, there's a cafeteria in the company." Brandon frowned. "For the children." Me, "Okay." After more than 2 months of Brandon's care, not only did I not lose weight due to morning sickness, but I gained a few pounds. On Friday, Brandon made an appointment with the doctor to check me up, and I was a little nervous. Brandon comforted me. "It's okay, you are in good condition recently, don't worry." After the examination, the doctor nodded with a smile. "Not bad, the nutrition in all aspects is up to standard, and the child is developing well. It seems that the family members are good at taking care of people." I smiled and said, "Yes, I am good at it." Brandon looked very proud beside him. 15. When I was more than 6 months pregnant, my belly became noticeably bigger. In order to avoid being noticed, I rarely go out. Brandon saw that I was bored at home every day, so he suggested that we go on vacation to a small island abroad. Nowadays, he always uses, for the sake of the children, to shut me up, and I rarely refuse him. The scenery on the island is beautiful and the weather is sunny and windy. Brandon and I took a walk on the beach and felt very comfortable. Seeing that I was in a good mood, Brandon asked me with a smile, "Do you like this?" I nodded. "If you like, I'll bring you here often." I turned to look at him and said, "The baby will be born soon. You can take care of it often in the future. Come over." Brandon's face suddenly darkened and he didn't respond. I was a little confused and didn't know what had made him unhappy. When I woke up from my nap at noon, it was cloudy outside and windy. "I'm a little nervous." Brandon walked over quickly and said, "A typhoon is coming. There may be a water and power outage. Don't go out while you're here. I'll go to the warehouse with the front desk to get some water and candles as backup." I nodded and stared out the window as Brandon left. It was windy outside and many branches were broken and were floating in the air, which looked scary. Suddenly, a bright color on the beach caught my attention. It was a child. He was holding a red swimming ring and crying on the beach. The waves on the sea are getting bigger and bigger. The child's feet have been submerged and he may be swept into the sea at any time. I immediately stood up and ran to the door without hesitation. When I went out, I found that the wind was stronger than I had imagined, and it was almost impossible to stand outside. I ran towards the beach, looking for the child. The child had been blown down by the wind and was lying on the ground, being hit by the waves. I forgot I was pregnant and just ran without a care in the world. Just as I grabbed the child's hand, a huge wave came over and the child and I were instantly swept in. I suddenly became panicked, holding the child with one hand and swimming out with the other. But no matter how hard I tried, I could not swim to the shore and instead was choked by the waves. I don't know how long it was, but I was completely exhausted and my hands were too tired to lift up, so I was forced to drift in the waves. I felt desperate and put my hand on my stomach, thinking that I might die in the sea. Just as I was daydreaming, someone suddenly hugged my waist and I turned around immediately. "It's Brandon." He held my waist with one hand and swam forward with the other. When I saw him coming, I immediately calmed down and followed his force to tread water. I don't know how long it took, But I finally reached the shore and I breathed a sigh of relief. The child's parents have also come over, bringing their child to express their gratitude profusely. Before I could say anything, Brandon carried me to the hotel. Brandon was angry. This was my first reaction. 16. Brandon had a gloomy face and didn't say a word. I felt a little guilty and didn't dare to talk to him. As soon as Brandon entered the room, he put me on the sofa, wrapped me in a bath towel, and went to the bathroom to run hot water. When the bathtub was filled with water, he carried me in again. When he was about to help me take off my clothes, I quickly pulled him back and said, "I can do this myself." Brandon was stunned for a moment, then turned and walked out. When I came out of the hot shower, Brandon had changed his clothes and was sitting by the window. I pursed my lips and walked over slowly. Brandon saw me come out and poured a cup of hot water and pushed it in front of me. I picked it up and took a sip, glancing at him. Face still angry. I cleared my throat and tried to break the deadlock. "Luckily you are here today, otherwise I would be in danger." Brandon looked at me and said nothing. What a bad temper. I secretly complained in my heart. With a flattering smile on his face, he said, "Don't worry, I don't feel unwell. The child will be fine." Brandon frowned, his face becoming even more sour. I continued to comfort him. "I will go to check the baby as soon as I get home. The baby will be fine. Don't worry." Brandon stared at me, sounding a little gritted. "You think I only care about the kids?" I was stunned for a moment. "No. What else?" Brandon stood up, turned around twice, and looked furious. 17. I was a little confused. "What are you angry about?" Brandon stopped and turned to look at me. "I'm angry that you don't take yourself seriously. I told you the child is fine. I'm talking about you. I'm not worried about the child, I'm worried about you." Brandon yelled excitedly. I was a little stunned and my heart trembled. He stared at me for a while, then shook his head and smiled bitterly. "Patrick, I like you. If I don't tell you, will you never know?" I suddenly opened my eyes wide, a little incredulous. "You? Do you know why I go on blind dates?" I was stunned for a moment. "Because I found myself falling in love with you, I wanted to make sure that I'm not gay through a blind date. Also, before in Moonlight Tower, when I said that it was impossible for me to be with you, I was actually telling myself that I shouldn't like you." Brandon smiled bitterly. "I'm almost 30 years old and I found out I'm gay. I really couldn't accept it at first. I was so surprised that I couldn't even blink, and it took me a long time to find my voice. Is it because of the two of us after that incident? Maybe even earlier." Brandon lowered his head and his voice became very soft. "When I was in high school, I felt uncomfortable the first time I saw your cold and arrogant look, so I tried to steal your limelight and go against you everywhere. But later, I don't know when it started, you are the only one I can see in my eyes. I found out about the university you applied to, so I followed you there and chose the same major. I heard that you started your own business after graduation and founded a company. I kept telling myself that I just couldn't stand you and wanted to vent my anger on you. But that day..." Brandon trailed off. "I wasn't drunk that day, and I don't know what happened to me." Brandon's sudden confession left me dizzy. My heart seemed to stop beating, and an unknown emotion quickly passed through my heart. But before I could catch it, it was covered by a series of questions. Brandon actually likes me? Did it start a long time ago? How is this possible? Aren't we mortal enemies? As expected, I suffered from insomnia, and for more than one day. After returning home, Brandon saw that I was really uncomfortable and offered to move out. But he still sends an assistant to deliver 3 meals to me every day. I feel depressed and sigh every day. Justin couldn't bear to watch it anymore and asked me what was wrong. He has been out of town for the past few months following up on the civic project and hasn't been back to Beijing for a long time, so he came to see me specially. I sighed and shook my head. "You don't understand." Justin rolled his eyes. "Brandon pissed you off? If it's me that's the one who's provoking me." Justin was about to ask again when the doorbell rang. I went over and opened the door. It was Brandon's assistant, a smart-looking guy. The assistant handed me the meal. "Patrick, your dinner." I nodded, took it and looked at it, feeling a little confused. "Why is it from Moon Tower?" The assistant scratched his head and said, "Our boss has been having trouble cooking lately, so I had to go to Wangyue Tower to pack up." "Oh." I cleared my throat. "He is on a business trip?" The assistant pursed his lips and said, "Our boss had a car accident this afternoon and is in the hospital." "What?" I was instantly shocked and broke out in a cold sweat. My heart felt like it was being tightly grasped by an invisible big hand, and every beat brought a stinging pain. It was as if all the strength had been drained from the whole person, his legs became weak, and he could barely stand. Justin came over to help me up, glanced at the boy, frowned and asked, "Is it serious?" The assistant hesitated. "I don't know the details, but I heard that he was admitted to the ICU of Boya Hospital." After saying that, he bowed and said, "Patrick, I have something else to do. I have to go first." 19. My heart felt like it was being burned on fire, and I was burning with anxiety. I immediately urged Justin to drive me to the hospital. Justin was skeptical about the assistant's words and comforted me not to worry and to go over and take a look first. When we arrived at the hospital, I didn't wait for Justin to park the car. I asked the front desk where the ICU was and went straight there. As I arrived at the ICU door, I saw a bed covered with white cloth being pushed out. The nurse called out to the person nearby, "Where are the family members of the person who had the car accident today? Come over here quickly." Suddenly, my eyes went dark and my hands and feet went weak. As I was falling to the ground, a pair of hands supported my waist from behind. I turned around and immediately burst into tears. "Brandon?" When he saw me crying, he immediately frowned and pulled me to the next corridor. Asked softly, "What's wrong?" I sniffed and said hoarsely, "The assistant said you were in a car accident, it's serious, and you're in the ICU." Brandon was stunned for a moment and gently wiped my tears. "It's just a little scratch, it's okay, don't be afraid." I looked him up and down, and felt relieved when I saw no wounds. Brandon looked down at me. "Are you worried about me?" I glared at him with red eyes. "Nonsense." Brandon laughed, and after a moment he asked, "Are you worried about Brandon or the baby's father?" I was stunned. Thinking back on my feelings after hearing that Brandon was injured, it seems that I didn't think about the child at all and was just worried. Seeing that I didn't answer, Brandon sighed and held me carefully in his arms. "It's okay, because anything is fine, as long as you worry about me, I'm happy." I buried my head in his arms, and after a while, I replied in a muffled voice, "I'm worried about Brandon." Brandon held my shoulders and stood up, very surprised. "Really?" I pursed my lips and nodded. Brandon seemed very happy and stared at me with shining eyes. My face felt a little hot and I was just about to ask him not to look at me when someone next to me coughed. We both turned our heads. I don't know how long Justin had been watching. I suddenly felt embarrassed and blushed as I pushed Brandon's hand off my shoulder. On the way back, Brandon drove and Justin and I sat in the back. Justin glanced at the rearview mirror and whispered in my ear. I knew Brandon was a mean guy, and I was wondering why he suddenly became so kind and took the initiative to withdraw from the bidding for the Civic. I didn't expect that he had his eyes on a bigger project. Justin was hinting at something, so I coughed twice to signal him that there was no soundproofing in the car and he should stop talking. Brandon laughed in the front. "Justin, is your project going well recently?" Justin snorted coldly. "As long as you don't run into people with ulterior motives, everything will be fine." Brandon remained calm and said, "If you need any help, you can come to me directly." Justin sneered, "Don't dare. Just take good care of Patrick." Brandon smiled and nodded without saying anything else. 20. When we got home, Brandon got some hot water for me to soak my feet. My feet have started to get swollen recently, so Brandon would soak my feet and massage them for me every day. It's just that I always thought it was nothing before, but today I always feel weird. When Brandon was about to massage my feet, I flinched and coughed. I was rejected today. Brandon looked up at me and asked, "What's wrong?" "Well, I'm not tired today, so I don't need a massage." Brandon laughed out loud. "Really?" He suddenly came over and touched my forehead. I suddenly felt a little nervous and wanted to step back. Brandon seemed to have expected this and put his hand on the back of my head to prevent me from escaping. "Patrick, you kind of like me, don't you?" A sudden heat surged on my face, as if a fire was burning. My heart beat faster involuntarily and my hands picked at the corners of my clothes unconsciously. Before she could finish her sentence, Brandon sealed her mouth. 21. When I was 8 months pregnant, I followed the doctor's advice and went to the hospital early. Brandon arranged a special ward in Boya Hospital, which not only has a good environment but is also sufficiently hidden. Dr. Liu comes to check on me every day. As the birth date approached, I became more and more anxious and prone to losing my temper. Brandon often suffers from my misfortunes. Justin also made some sarcastic remarks from time to time. One night, I was in the ward waiting for Brandon to bring me food. No matter how much I waited, my temper immediately flared up. I went out angrily and wanted to go home to find him. When we arrived at the small garden downstairs in the hospital, I saw Brandon sitting on a bench and talking on the phone. I walked over quietly, wanting to catch him in the act. When I got closer, I realized that he was calling a doctor abroad to consult about the risks of my surgery. Listening to him skillfully reporting my various indicators to the other side, my nose felt sore and tears almost fell. These days, Brandon is under no less pressure than I am. It's just that he is used to digesting things on his own and doesn't want to bring his bad emotions to me. At night, I hugged Brandon and whispered to him, "Brandon, have I made it very hard for you during this period?" Brandon kissed the corner of my mouth. "It's not hard at all, baby. You don't know how happy you make me." 22. The day before the operation, Brandon washed my feet as usual. I touched his head and said, "Brandon, if something unexpected happens tomorrow, I don't want you to blame yourself, because giving birth to this child has always been my own choice." Brandon didn't look up. I felt a little strange and looked down. Big tears were dripping into the basin. I felt a little sad and comforted him. "I'm just worried about what might happen." Brandon raised his head and looked me in the eyes, his voice hoarse. "There is no such thing as a single event." I looked at his red eyes, smiled and nodded. "Well, there is no such thing as a contingency." The next day, I was pushed into the operating room. Brandon held me and put a ring on my ring finger. I was surprised for a moment, then I smiled and squinted to look at the reflection on the ring. Brandon kissed my forehead and said, "Come on, baby. I'll be waiting for you at the door." I nodded. "Okay. When I come out, I'll tell you a secret." Brandon smiled and nodded. "I'll wait and hear it." When I opened my eyes again, I was back in the ward. Brandon fell asleep holding my hand beside me, looking much more haggard. I hooked my finger and Brandon woke up immediately and leaned over to look at me. "You're awake." He burst into tears before he could finish his sentence. I raised my hand with difficulty to wipe his tears. Brandon kissed my fingers and said, "You've been sleeping for 3 days. Do you know how scared I am?" I whispered back, "I'm sorry." Brandon leaned over and kissed my forehead, choking with sobs as he said, "Baby, you are so brave." It's a girl weighing 15 pounds. 23. It was a sunny day when I was discharged from the hospital. Brandon packed my luggage and my baby's luggage early in the morning. The aunt and confinement nanny are also in place at home. Justin drove to pick me up and kept saying that he was driving for his goddaughter, not for me. I was too lazy to deal with him and Brandon and I were busy playing with our daughter. Brandon suddenly thought of the promise I made before the surgery and asked me, "Baby, you said you would tell me a secret after the surgery. What is it?" I smiled and hooked my finger, and Brandon leaned his ear closer. "Actually, I wasn't drunk enough to pass out that day." Brandon's eyes widened instantly. I saw that he looked stunned and couldn't help laughing out loud. The golden sunlight in the distance is like a thread of hope, gently weaving colorful dreams. From then on, the wandering prodigal finally found a home, and the traveler with few relatives finally found a bond.